There was once a time when you could easily turn an office PC into a somewhat capable gaming machine just by adding a low power, sometimes even half height GPU, depending on the case. Nowadays those kind of GPUs are few and far between, not to mention their prices. One of those GPUs is the GT1030. It was the lowest offering from the Pascal lineup, not counting the later released GT1010. There were two versions, one with DDR4 RAM and the better one with GDDR5, which I had the fortune to test. With 384 CUDA cores and 2GB of VRAM on a 64-bit bus, we can't expect much, especially compared to its bigger brothers like the 1050 or 1050 Ti. Still, it was capable of playing lighter and esports titles, all while using up just to 30 watts of power. Its direct competitor was the RX 550, which consumed slightly more power at around 50 watts, but also offered an encoder, something the GT1030 lacks. That's a notable downside, especially if you wanted to record or stream, while niche is still a nice feature to have. This time the GPU was paired with an i7 6700 and 16GB of RAM, as my usual bench PC was occupied. My wife was replaying Horizon Zero Dawn. This setup represents the classic office PC turned gaming PC quite well. The CPU is from roughly the same era and admittedly overkill, but since I wanted to gauge the GPU performance, it shouldn't be a bottleneck. All tests were performed at 1080p as always. The first game I tried was Minecraft. Fabulous settings proved too much for the little card. The average FPS was around 50, which sounds fine, but the 1% lows dropped to 4.4 FPS, very choppy. Dropping the settings to fancy boosted performance to around 200 FPS, with the 1% lows at above 29 FPS. The difference was night and day, and honestly the game doesn't look much worse with the worse setting. I wasn't expecting much when testing Counter-Strike 2 on the lowest preset, but I was pleasantly surprised. While the visuals weren't great, the performance was solid, 82 FPS on average and 50 FPS for the 1% lows, which is very playable if you don't mind the lower quality. Dredge is an easy game to run and the GPU proved that by pushing just under 150 FPS. World of Tanks was tested on both low and medium presets. In my opinion both are playable, but the medium settings look noticeably better at the cost of about 100 FPS on average. The 1% lows were solid in both cases. Now for some built-in benchmarks. Civilization 6, a game from around the same era, ran well enough on medium settings, delivering averages in the mid-30s and the 1% lows about 10 FPS lower. Lower settings do offer more performance, but they are not really necessary since the game isn't fast-paced and I personally prefer the visuals there. Metro Last Light is an older AAA title. It ran reasonably well on the high settings. Interestingly, the 1% lows were quite consistent across all tested presets. Total War Attila is being featured on the channel for the first time. Although it predates the GPU, it is quite demanding. On the lowest settings we got 53 FPS on average with no major drops, but it looks quite poor. Increasing the quality to performance presets costs around 15 FPS, but makes the game more visually pleasing to the eye. This was also the first GPU I tested using 3D Mark Firestrike, where it scored 3,494 points. These kind of benchmarks are usually reserved for high-end cards, but I had a slightly crazy idea. What if I tried to push this card to its limits? Time ago I used the laptop quite a lot. That one had an MX 150, which is essentially a GT1030 in disguise. Talking about laptops, if you want to learn how to keep your running cool, check out this video that I made. Now back to the GT1030 and running it overclocked. But I was pleasantly surprised to see that the desktop counterpart can go even further. I managed an overclock of about plus 200 MHz on the core, though it rarely held that peak, and plus 800 MHz on the memory. This resulted in a score of 4096 points, a 17% increase. Metro Last Light saw a similar improvement, though mainly in average FPS and not in the 1% lows. Attila Total War showed a smaller gain of around 20% when overclocked. Interestingly, Civilization 6 showed no improvement in its benchmark, so performance gains will vary depending on the game when you are overclocking the GPU. I may have gotten a bit carried away, but I even managed to set the world record for the GT 1030 paired with an i7 6700 running the before mentioned Firestrike. In conclusion, the GT 1030 remains a somewhat capable little GPU. It can still handle esports titles, indie games, and even some older AAA games at lower settings. But the real appeal of this card isn't raw performance, it's efficiency. The compact form factor and tiny power consumption makes it a candidate for certain use cases like low power PCs in hot environments, or when converting a small form factor PC to a gaming PC on a very tight budget. This is it for this video. If you liked it, please drop a like and leave a comment, and I will see you all in the next one.